Howdy, howdy. We are gathered here today to enter the DIMtZUM. I'm here with Frater Perseus, my cohort and partner within this new HyperSigil, hauntsigil, incredible AudioSigil that we just created. And we both thought we could take this time to really dive into the creation, the praxis of our disparate works within creating such a beast, but also share in the pride of how whiplash, how creative, how quick it was to construct something, especially from two magicians and creatives in two transcontinentally disparate places. And you can too, you know. But yeah, man, we birthed it on Sunday. And yeah, how are you feeling?
That was a crazy day in general. You know, there was a lot of things happening that day, but yeah, I actually woke up on time to actually see it, you know, at the election time, get out at the election time, like we had talked about, which we'll talk about later too. But I feel good about it. I feel actually the more and more I listen to it, especially the visualizer, like that just sounds really good. I don't know if that's how the raw files sound or if there is some kind of thing YouTube does to it, but they sound, I just downloaded the visualizer onto my YouTube account and I just was like walking around last night listening to it, and man, it's just, we did something really cool. Like it gets me out of my technical drum mindset that I'm stuck in a lot of the times. Like I got to learn a new chop. I got to get super tight at this. I got to be, you know, this part has to be technical, but it also has to be, you know, beautiful audio, you know, like it has to be just perfect. So like, rather than worrying about that, I just, with this project, it's not that I played at a lesser quality or anything like that. It's just that I wasn't obsessed with how my parts were going to play into the whole. I was more interested in how what you were going to add to them. And I feel like you probably had the opposite, where you're like, wow, these things are really cool. I don't usually have beats like this to work with, so it inspired you. So I think it was cool. It kind of took our Virgo-ness out of the picture a lot. That didn't get in the way as much as it would have, you know?
Yeah, it was a good confluence of like the Virgo rising to the Virgo sun, and like how, you know, I'm a bit fast and loose, I think, in the creative praxis as a whole. But at the same time, when it came time to, you know, really dive into the sonicness of the thing and mixing and mastering and stuff, that's where the Virgo stuff could get a little in the way, but at the same time beneficial, you know. And whereas you started with that kind of well performed, you know, well executed polyrhythmic, you know, drum recordings. But I guess we should talk about like, yeah, what the genesis of the project was and how, you know, our ethos kind of developed into what we want to do with this project, let alone kind of our disparate magical stuff that we put into it. And I think it really does come down to your rhythms are the genesis or the birth of each of these, you know, tracks or this whole project as a whole. And, you know, we decided that was gonna be kind of not an absolute, but definitely a maxim in creating this thing, that to keep me away from my known trickery or wizardry and to really like exemplify an experimental nature, like I needed to allow you to do what you do best, and that was, you know, create the bones and the rhythm.
Yeah, man, and I appreciate that, and for multiple reasons. One, because when you're in the creative space, you don't want somebody, not that you would nitpick or be overcritical, you just don't want somebody over your shoulder. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
And that has to do just in general. That has nothing to do with you specifically. But I do love that, and I also appreciate the fact that it's like, okay, dude, normally you write drum parts to already written melodies, you know? So now it's like, what are you going to come up with? How do you make a drum part melodic but not overplay? How do you kind of structure things without knowing where it's going to go. That's why I was amazed at how it sounds and what you did on your end, because I mean that honestly, like not in a over congratulatory way, but I'm just really stoked that it sounds so cohesive after you added your parts that it sounds like we wrote them at the same time in the same place, which they were not.
Yeah, and I think that's where the magic lies, because this was foreign to me. I know we've discussed this, that I think we both were in our spaces as creators or magicians, and I had just gone through the gamut of really kind of excising any hopes to play with somebody else or to create with somebody else on that level. And I, outside of, Eric Millar or some other folks doing creative projects with, I didn't think a band dynamic was in the future unless it was, me backing up Mary on the Moon Division stuff or vice versa, So there wasn't any like intention to create this thing. And I think that's what was beautiful about, okay, yeah, you play, I love your drums, you post, you're a long storied teacher, and you post these really wonderful, videos of you playing on Instagram. And after we got introduced to each other, it was very much like, what are we doing? We should, at least attempt something. And I think my mode and method was like, hey, I have these songs already. Let's see what you can do with them. And I think that we realized real quick that no, if this is going to work, it's got to be a very much like, a creative catharsis thing from the ground up. It can't be like, hey, play drums on this thing I've already made. There's room for that in the future. But for this specifically, it really needed to be the beauty of halves, and it started with your drumming. And then, we should talk about how you captured your drums and what that process was like.
Yeah, well, I'm actually, this has to do with how amazed I am with the sound of the drums on the album. I mean, it's kind of insane because I use the little Tascam recorder, which I have in here somewhere. I don't know. I think it's over there by my shelf over there, but it's a 2 microphone, like 2 condenser mic Tascam. It's not a super cheap little one, but it's like a $300 or $400 device. And
yeah,
I just set that up on a tripod that I had bought. We used to use it. The reason I even have that thing is because we had one years ago in a band that I was in, and we used that to record demos. And then that one broke, and we gave it a Viking funeral, literally. And then we bought another one. We bought the updated one, and we used that for practice recordings and demos and stuff. And then the band broke up, and I fell into possession of it because bass player doesn't record anything, and then our old guitar player has a whole home studio set up, so he didn't need it. So I was like, hell yeah, I will definitely take this. And after years of, I'm familiar with it. So after years of knowing how to use it at least a little bit cursory, I was able to find a place in this room, in the Mauve room, even though it's not so Mauve right now, to find the exact right way. If you can see, these are black sound blankets behind me. This pads my entire, what would be my living room in my house. It's a really small house, so this has become like the creative laboratory. And so it's already sound treated, and then we use the Tascam, or I did, in a special spot right over here, to tweaked it, found exactly where it picked up the kick, the toms, the tone. The cymbals weren't too brash. I know there is a little bit, but also my cymbal choice is brash in a couple ways, so it's hard to get that completely out of the mix. But yeah, basically, long story short, very simple device, very simple placement, and the drums were done that way.
Yeah, and what I love about this was, as somebody that drums myself, but will also mic a kit to high heaven because I can, and get lost in that process. Like, you lose the durability of the performance aspect the more you're putting into the process of recording or capturing. So just starting by like the genealogy of, I'm just going to capture the room as best I can of what of just my simple performance is like perfectly encapsulates what this project should be. And it's like those limitations were, you know, freedom inducing. And, you know, I made sure to keep that in mind when, you know, you sent me the tracks, was that anything that I put on top of it, I had to be able to replicate live. Like, or it would be, if it was a guitar playing, you know, my baritone guitar, it would be done in a take, as sloppy as it might be, as, crunchy or unwieldy in the mixing and mastering process as it might be. Like, it had to share that genealogy. And I think what I was really excited about that was, you know, I've been working a lot again with 4-tracking, and there is that accountability with cassette tape or any of these kind of recording processes where you can't hide behind a lot of post-production. It loses all of its momentum and fervor, you know, if the performance isn't good first and foremost. And good, you know, in your case, good, right? In my case, like, whatever serviceable to whatever we're trying to make. But you know what I mean? So like,
it was really good.
But like, it definitely shared in that construct, and that was, you know, built from your, maybe, I don't want to say limitations, but something akin to that in the realm of recording, right? Using a simple Tascam, you know, XY mic, single recorder, you know, just capturing the Mauve room, and then having that be the antenna, or having that dispatch over here to the dimming room where I have my own setup, and albeit a bit more, you know, equipped with like recording techniques. It was great to, you know, remember like that ethos of let's limit the idea of multi-tracking, or like, just because we have the tools doesn't mean we need to use them, you know?
Right.
So it was always going back to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. That was one of the things that made it fun, was I was just recording things that I thought were cool or interesting or moved me in some way. I mean, they're just rhythms at some point, but I mean, to break them down to just rhythms is also taken away from the fact that I had to get into a meditative state a little bit to get into those. You know, it wasn't just sit down and play something, you know, that I was telling you last time we talked, you know, when I would do that, I'm like, okay, this is a cool beat. This is like technical. Like my mind started to get in the way, that I would mess it up. I'd mess it up. And like, I don't have what you have. I don't have this computer that I can just like, whoop, all right, delete, play again, delete, play again. I have to physically get up and walk around, stop it, restart it, sit back down, and start playing again. And I would just I would fuck up within like the first 2 beats, and I'm like, yep, shit, you know. So it's like, it required a lot of focus, and I don't know, it would have been different, you know. I would have been different had I had the ease of your setup. And I'm not saying what you did was easy, but I'm saying like having all the gear and have everything set up and have the DAW running and have everything like that's awesome, and I love that. But like I always say this, I'm a primitive being who just hits things, you know. Like, I'm not stupid, but I don't like to have wires in the way of that as much as possible. Even though I do want to understand, I would love to record myself, and I kick myself all the fucking time for not learning that and getting those things. So I'm glad you kept, you know, even though you have the ability, you kept that in mind. Like, one, we have to be able to reproduce this live. I mean, you were definitely a big proponent of that from the beginning, you know. So I stuck with that too, because I don't want to play things in multi-layer things that I can't play live, because we want to do this live eventually.
Yeah, and it just, you know, it calls back to that ethos of it, and it's also a confluence of what I've been feeling pretty remarkably as of late, and even my own stuff. I mean, all of this accoutrement was always in service to the song, right? It's always here for a solo person like me to be able to drum with my own compositions, or lay down bass with my own compositions. And I think at the advent of this, whatever this, you know, digital age is, where it's getting so easy to lose that somatic sensibility of like capturing the room, of even miking shit, you know. It's like, people don't really do that anymore. They'll be reticent to just record at the computer. But I'm the same way. Like, I have, you know, a drum station back there. There's my amps over there. And I'm the same, where even though the interface is here, I'll have to walk all the way back over here to stop and restart the recording. You know what I mean? Because I need to be in that space for the guitar. It has to capture the amp and the mic. And like, I really didn't use many effects or pedals really either, outside of like a delay or echo, but all that fuzz is just the analog tube fuzz from my amp, just with the gain, the master, the special, Yamaha old school, JX VCD or whatever bass amp that I play through. Like it all had to be encapsulated in the room. It's kind of like practical effects, right? You don't want to just green screen everything. You don't want to like just rely on putting it in post. Like you want to capture in camera. And I think that's what we both did, whether it was the dimming room here in Washington or it was the Mauve room there in Illinois, And I think that's what makes it sound like it's in the same room. Like you can't, I really don't think you can cheat that stuff. You know what I mean?
No, and two things come to mind hearing what you just said. One is you're saying, modern musicians or modern music producers don't want to put real drums in. And it's like, yeah, because miking a real drum kit and getting it to sound good is a bitch. Like it's not fun. It's not easy. And of course you just like, let's just throw it in Pro Tools, or let's just throw, drum, whatever it's called, Drumageddon or whatever one of these fucking drum programs is over the top, and just have them play it sound like shit and then just quantize everything.
Yeah.
Like that. That's
quantizing.
It's so stupid. It worked for a minute, I guess, for people in production. I get why it's like the utilitarian mind likes that, but Josh Eppard, who's the drummer from Coheed and Cambria, who's probably one of my favorite drummers, whose style has leaked into my style, even though you can't really tell all the time. He said something very interesting when they recorded one of their more recent records. He said, he was saying how like I play hard. I mean, this is paraphrased. Like I play really hard and I put my soul into these parts, and when you can hear that through the microphones. And I agree with that. I agree with that 100%. You can tell there's an energy that comes through, especially on drums. I mean, it comes on every single instrument, but I do believe it happens on drums as well. And you can hear when somebody means something, like when somebody sings a line. We've all heard singers who can hit the note and they can hit a note perfectly, but it doesn't move you. And when somebody hits a note that's a little more rough and it's the note, but it's not as beautifully pristine, and they're trying to say something with their voice when they hit that note, that you get the chills, like that. And that's the difference, is like you can hear that. You can tell when I hit something on the drums that I meant what I was playing. And I think that comes through the mix, and you can't, like you said, you can't replicate that. So
no, you can't. And it's like what we talked about before too, just how deeply intentional and magical the resonance is, that, the documentation of it, of not only you in the room, but your physiology in the room, of, your breathing, your fingertips, your calluses, how you're touching the things, like, it's just that beautiful document. And I can't share enough how important it is to capture the room,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of, the Mauve room and the dimming room, we learned pretty early on that these were kind of antennas, that were kind of constructing, this Mauve zone, or this dim desert, between us. And it was like naturally folkloric in a way, like these, even lyrically, all of the lyrics heard on the album, if they're not just the channeled, like quick demos I did anyway, even the refined lyrics come from just channeled lyrics of me just getting ideas down. And I think there is like a purity to that too. It's like I can sit here and be, the pretentious wordsmith that, I'm want to be a lot of the time, but it was also, part and parcel to be like very, like, even if it was capturing the feeling and something that was like truly connecting with the music rather than pondering it way too deeply or too hard,
Yeah. Well, you definitely Man, I was listening to Last and Low last night, and we'll get into the tracks in a little bit here, but I was listening to Last and Low, and like the actual part where you say that, Last and Low, what a sight to behold. Like that is like the way that you bend that note and the way that you say that. And even the little, I think what really drove that point home for me was the little promo demo you made for that song, where it goes onto the picture, the drone footage of you and you're smiling.
Yeah.
The one little clip where it catches you smiling is actually very eerie with that music behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And just it drove something emotionally in me for some reason, even though it's a funny little clip. It's cool. I love it. I think they're great, but even though it's just like a little clip we used to promote it on Instagram or whatever, like that was artistic in itself. And then I started listening to the lyrics, and what's funny, some people might not know this, but I didn't even know the lyrics until you put them on the Bandcamp and I could look at them. Really.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm playing on this stuff and like getting emotionally and spiritually attached to all these songs, and like I'm not even sure what you're saying or talking about. So
yeah, and I was kind of reticent to put them on the Bandcamp, to be honest. And maybe there's still a little regret in doing that, because I really love the idea of keeping them open for interpretation, because I'm just as, wanting to interpret them myself, because they really were like, speaking of getting in the movement or the process, like my own audiomancy praxis is very much that. There's a lot of ritualization, and it wasn't different other than, I had your drumming kind of on loop while I, dimmed the outside world and just got into it and just was repeatedly, I had it just tracking everything all the time until it just felt right, and I could just keep whatever I played last, So it really was like this meditative thing with the guitar, and I would be humming these words out loud. And it was the same with vocals, where, through a kind of a ritualistic praxis of getting rid of the outside world, I would sit there and basically meditate it and chant and have these like mutant melodies or whatever. And I knew that what we called like the lyrical spaghetti, like I'm a firm believer in that as a tactic, but I'm also a firm believer in like interpreting those lyrics instead of just utilizing the melody. Like, what was I actually saying? Like, what did it inspire to say? Whether or not it makes a resolute sense or not. And that's what it was. There might be some refining in pronunciation, but like those lyrics were kind of always there, right?
Yeah, I mean, your process definitely was unknown to me when we started, and I understood that after a couple times sending you something that was a demo and then it came back as a final thing. And I wasn't pissed about that. I thought it was great. Callie's a great example of that. But
yeah,
especially as the genesis of the project, I remember that day, I remember being like, oh my God, like, especially once I heard the lead at the end and that awesome style of guitar that I love that you play. I was like, well, this is leading somewhere, but it's just almost, I lost my point there. But needless to say, man, like we are creating a third space between us. I think that's kind of what we were talking about, is like the fact that the room and the process on each side of this transcontinental thing is coalescing and it's working together, and I think that that's pretty amazing in itself. And I love that. Like, I love that. Like, to me, it's so uncommon. It's so uncommon. And it's so, like you said, it lends itself to folklore, which you and I think are, whether we know it or not, I mean, you know it, but I mean, I'm definitely more into that too, for sure. Like, I love that. And looking at your life through your own lore, you made me remember how much I love that about life, like reading your stuff too. So yeah, the process has been crazy. It's been very interesting.
I think, and just to touch on, Callie, I think being the first, and we should play that here in a second, because it really is the progenitor of all of this. And even though, you sent it to me as a demo. I always sent them back as demos too. It wasn't ever the intention of like, oh, here's a finalized thing. Like, it's funny going back and actually doing a proper mix on a lot of them. I could tell it was just like here, check this out. This is kind of, what came out of me. But it was also, part of the ethos to be like, oh shit. But at the same time, these deserve to live, in a world of their own making, and to not have to get out of this refined culture that like so many artists and like current creators are into, where it's just like everything has to be perfect. Every T has to be, I was going to say every T has to be dotted, which is a great example of what I mean, like every T has to be dotted, every I has to be crossed, and like, that's the thing. It's, I want to escape from that, and utilizing this digital space, between us, with that sort of ethos in tow, I think is like a perfect example of how to fight against that kind of digital monoculture of like everything simplified or refined for no reason, and still utilizing it as a tool, right? Utilizing it's amazing to me that, it's a rarity for like two musicians to work like this day and age. When it shouldn't be. It should be like a perfectly used tool and bridge, and you can still have analog, performance heavy, true in the room feeling, without it being truly in the room, which would be the ultimate goal. But I think as two pragmatic, jobbing, workers, artists, like anyone can do this and still like inspire some like fervor and health and human error and excitement into, the childlike wonder of creating a musical project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I've had the most fun I've had in years doing this. And that's one of the reasons I continued with it, was because I haven't had this much fun being creative and making music in a long time, especially after my last project that I was in for in many iterations for, the better part of 2 decades had fallen apart. And, I put so much into that, and I learned from that though. I think we go through things and we learn not to do things in the future, and like you're saying, I think the internet and digital, audio workstations and all this technology you and I utilize to do this is just the plumbing. It's right. just the, how do I get my song, my track to Keats in Seattle from Illinois? How do I get it there? Well, I just send it through Drive. Like we weren't like, let's utilize all these different tools to add on layers and layers and layers of complexity. We just used it to just make it possible. That's it. That's all we did. I think that's the point you're trying to make, is not over digitalizing and not over complicating and not over refining and making it perfect, letting it be what it's going to be, trying to do a great performance, obviously, not just like whatever shit comes out of my mouth I'm going to keep, but at the same time, like, or whatever bullshit I end up hitting is going to be the thing, but also not getting too much in the way and letting, like I said before, the sausage make itself a little bit,
Yeah. And especially like, that two people anywhere in the world with a laptop can do this, a laptop each. Like, I think that was the beauty of it. It just reminded me, it's like, just because, we can doesn't mean we should. And we probably shouldn't, because we don't need to, with a lot of, the elements. And, your drums pretty much remain the same. It's not like I did a lot of post-production things. It was just standard, mixing on a lot of the drums. And so, yeah, just keeping to that ethos. Yeah, so there we are. Cali 333, which another good, I think this is a prime example of what we were talking about, because this really is just guitar, vocals, drums. That's it.
Right.
And also not only the genesis of the drums, but kind of the idea, maybe a thematic idea, because of what you name songs or what we discuss, that end up being named a drum track that you send me. And this one was Kali Yuga, correct?
Yeah, it started off, I posted a video, which is still on my Instagram, called Kali Yuga Kabbalah. And it's just, I like taking a color, and I like taking esoteric ideas and terminology that are like, what is that, onomatopoeia or whatever, where it's like the same letter or whatever that is. So like Kali, K, and then Kabbalah. So I thought that was really cool. And then
alliteration. Yeah.
Alliteration. That's what I mean. Not onomatopoeia. Yeah. Sorry. There you go. Shows my knowledge of that.
That's the word of sounds, like pow, boom. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That also works.
Well, I get those confused. But anyway, I was at the grocery store, and I posted that earlier that day, and I was buying whatever groceries, and I sent you a message, and I said, hey, would you want to use this for one of the songs? Because we had just started talking about jamming, and you were like, fuck yes. So I that's how it started. It was just, Kali Yuga, and I've had a lot of ideas about that, the whole concept of the Kali Yuga lately. It's been seeping into my reality, so it kind of just came through that portal.
Yeah, and that was my take on it, because I did, I received that transmission through the drumming and the syncopation itself. It very much is like a, call to arms, like the gates of a whirlwind kind of opening, and to me it was almost like not taking pleasure in, but kind of fortifying that, yes, we are in a Kali Yuga, and that we do need to synchronize maybe with Karanzan, the serpent of chaos, and that maybe communing with it is better than fearing it. And that's what turned into Kali 333, 333 being the number of Karanzan. And thus, the lyrical kind of stuff just was born out of that. And it also shares, with my recent work with Bobby Hale and listening post alpha, and that numerology or that ALW cipher stuff. So that's all in there too, without trying. Just a perfect document of where I was when you sent me this thing, and where you were when you sent me this thing, so I think it's just it's a beautiful communion. And one funny anecdote about this song in particular is, when it came time to mixing and mastering the whole, I had given a try, I don't know, 8 times to kind of remix this song or fix little bits there, and got way too involved with that process to where it started kind of devaluing how beautiful and rugged that initial communion was, that we ended up just using the very first demo pretty much of the whole thing. And it's not unlike all the other songs, really. We always kind of went back to its initial, when things clicked for each of the songs in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
we definitely did. And Cali's a great example of hearing, and like you're talking about other artists picking up on this and doing things, at disparate places or at disparate times or whatever, coming together. Like, we didn't know anything was going to work between us. We were just like, hey, I remember saying to you, we were talking about the astrology stuff, and I was like, hey man, at some point in the next year, it would be cool to do an audio thing sigil together or whatever, you know what I mean? So, and then you hit me up about it, and we didn't know it was going to work at all. It was just kind of like, hey, let's try to do this, and let's see if we can make something happen. And then you came back to that, and I knew we had something, I knew something was there. And I think when you listen to Cali, you can hear, anytime you listen to your favorite band's first record or their demos, their first EP, you can tell the sound is there, and you can see oh, this is the direction they were going, and the elements are there, but they're not refined in artistic, beautiful sense yet. And I think that Cali has that. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think it's like the perfect encapsulation of all the ethos we were just talking about, from its like rugged intentions to its like great confluence of metaphysical ideas that we were having on our own, to bringing together. And I think that brings me to another aspect, because you were talking earlier about how you learned from past projects and past bands. And one thing that, I want to be like excited and clear to say about this one was like how intentional I was to not treat this as I had past projects, where I really was kind of the sole generator of, the song, the recording, like all of the above. Even if other people were in said band, it still always felt to me, and that was a hard lesson to learn, because there were aspects of myself that I didn't like in those situations, where I wouldn't let go of things, or I would obsess and be a bit dictator like about certain aspects. And throughout this entire process, that quote from Buzz Osborne just kept barking in my head. It's like, if you're working with somebody else, like, let them do their thing. Like, why work with them, at all, if they can't just be allowed to, be who they are and work with them. And that really, helped solidify like my want to not regress back into, overtly controlling kind of aspects that I had in my younger, band days and stuff. So to me, this has all been like an overarching, like, big growth, even as a human being and as a collaborator, too. So, yeah.
I'm glad you felt that you were able to implement those things and grow, man. That's
not
great.
To say that there were at any time where I was like, no, I don't like this, or this isn't good. It was more so an act of like, being resolute in what I'm doing, and also being resolute in what you're doing, and like just trusting that. There was no point through this entire project where I was like, oh, I'm not cool with this, or like, I don't want this. You know what I mean? I mean to say that was a very much like an evolution of how collaboration works in this context that is different from, Spare Spells or like another past group I had.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, it was easy to work with you on this. I don't feel like either of us got too critical, because we both understood what the parameters were, and that's, we both had entered into them voluntarily. And I think that is what kept us having fun, which I think is, you get lost when you get so serious about music. You forget the point is to be expressive and creative and enjoy it. You get so it's like, it's a message, it's meaningful, I have to like make sure it's and it's just like, yes, that is part of it, but that's never going to flower and blossom if you choke it to death.
Yeah,
it's just going to happen, so.
And
I tried to not be as critical. I tried to not be critical on you either. There was a couple ones you sent me that I was like, I don't feel like this is the sound of the band, and I feel like you can do a better rendition of these ideas for this project. But I was never like, this fucking sucks, dude. You know what I mean? Like, I was always trying to be respectful and kind of be like, I hear what you're doing, but I feel like maybe a different direction would be better,
Yeah, there was, those two instances where even I knew when I sent them was just to kind of show you, hey, I plugged in today and this is what came out. But even I knew it was like a shot in the dark. They were just so wildly different. And they also, because of variables and even like ritualistic variables not being heated like the other ones that worked, where I'd be working on a mix of an album of mine, the HaLLOWED series, for hours. And then to break away from that, I would use the project as a means to kind of escape that, but wouldn't shake what I was doing prior, altogether. So it wasn't giving it its due as the other ones should. Yeah. And there was 2 cases where I allowed that to happen, and knowing it when I sent it and shared it both times was like, you know, this if he does like this, then I'd be surprised, but at the same time, like, it's also a document of, hey, I'm messing around, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think as long as you have to learn to disagree respectfully, and any kind of a marriage, a friendship, any kind of business partnership, any kind of partnership at all, like, you have to, like, stand your ground and be like, no, I don't think this is right, or I don't think this is the thing we should do, but not be, yo, this fucking sucks, what is this, you know what I mean? Because, like, that's also not productive, and that's actually counterproductive. If you say, hey, I love the fact that it's not lying and it's not manipulative. You just choose to vocalize the more positive and productive parts of your thoughts. That's all it is. It's not a linguistic tactic. It's not like me manipulating you to play something different. It's me saying, hey man, I do like the fact that you're thinking outside the box, and this is different than the other stuff. I like that you're doing that. But at the same time, I didn't feel like this one particularly fit the vibe of the band. And when you say that to somebody, they go, okay, I'm not being attacked. Okay, I can change this.
Right.
This person, you know what I mean? Like, and that's how you have to be. And that's how I'd want you to approach me if you didn't like the drums. If you were like, hey man, this rhythm sounds like the other one, or hey, I'm having trouble working with this. Can you send me something different? I'm not like, well, this is what it is, man. Just deal, you know? Like, so I think being able to do that is huge. And for you too, like, having the
I was going to say, like, the sigil process, like designing the sigil, was not unlike that, where it was just, hey, this isn't hitting me. I like elements of this, but, it's just not popping. And, like, through every process like that, something greater came from it, because we were just open and honest about, it's just not it. But I dig elements of it, see where that can go, and that was the beauty. I know this sounds probably really rudimentary for folks that might be listening and are in bands or in marriages or whatever, but you have to understand, like, how elemental that is for 2 strong-willed, 2 strong-headed creators in disparate places to maintain that connectivity. When it'd be very easy, just to be like, nah, fuck this, or I'm good, and just, or change something and not give a shit what the other person thinks,
Right. I'm a critical, stubborn bastard, dude. Like, I really am. So, I mean, I'd seem that way. I might seem super jovial and, satirical a lot of the time, and that's great. But on the inside, a lot of the time, I mean, I'm just super critical of my own work because I don't have time to fuck around. So when I mess up a beat, I don't go, well, what do? I go, no, fuck that. That sucked. Do it again. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I have to learn to, over the years, I've had to learn to mediate that. I can't just be that direct with people because they don't see it where I'm coming from. I don't mean it angrily or offensively. It's just so matter to the fact that it just kind of shocks people. So I've had to temper that a little bit in order to work with people. And I feel like, your mind works somewhat similarly to that too, where you're like, I have an idea. I know this is what I want to do. I want this. This isn't exactly what I'm seeing, and I'm not going to, like, we can find a middle ground, but I'm also not just going to let, my idea go to nothing either, which is great.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we should launch into Haunter, which was the second one. And I think the only pretense we had for this one is that we were still experimenting with each other. So we wanted to do something not drastically different, but in another aura of atmosphere, and to try something, not as quick and maybe hot-headed as Cali 333 came out to be, you know what I mean? But something a bit more, how do I say this? A serpentine, but at the same time, sneaky, and something a little bit nefarious in a way, but still overall, a beautiful, a beautiful construction. And I say nefarious by meaning more like mischievous, and it's like overall rendition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like the title for this one is very apt because it is like one of the most ghostly sounding tracks on the album to me, in my own view. So.
Consciousness is a ghost, a spook, a phantom that somehow spoils the logic of this perfectly balanced clockwork universe, this worldview that we have created for ourselves.
That was Haunter, specifically spelled HAVNTR, which we should get into as well, was also in the running for a project name. Far better suited, I think, for this track. But yeah, there's so much to unpack here. One element I wanted to also explain, another major contribution of yours, was sample selection. Whereas, like, almost giving you another element to perform in a way outside of just the drums. So maybe we can talk a little bit about the cachet of samples we use throughout the albums, but specifically this one, because I think the Strange Angel sample really solidified and molded this song.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that sample is from the show Strange Angel, which was a show, like a biopic on a series, 2-season series on Jack Parsons, who I know I think we're both really into and appreciate in the occult sense. I love his work, and I think so many things about that dude were interesting, not just the rocket stuff. And the show I always loved too, because it just kind of re-enchanted me. Every time I got into a lull in life, I'd throw that show back on, and they like reignited something in me. Even though I'm not specifically into Thelema or anything like that necessarily, it just got me thinking, and there were so many good lines in that show that in a previous project we had planned to layer these group of samples that I'd sent you throughout our live performance and kind of make it the cohesive factor in that performance. So that one specifically, I figured you might gravitate to, because it's uplifting. You know, it's uplifting. And
yeah, it's empowering. Yeah.
She says, I think this might be something wrong with me and I need to be fixed. Can you do that? And the Magus, he's of the temple of the Agape Lodge, says, no, because you are not broken. And then she kind of gets enamored with him and the fact that he's, you know, can help her and that she's not unfixable. And she always thought she was. And, you know, it's actually a beautiful moment. So I like that we use that one. And the fact that the music in the background is actually in the same key or whatever, or you made it in the same key. Really cool.
Yeah. And that was one of those like really magical happenstance things, because you sent me, it was like a folder full of Strange Angel samples. And this must have been like the second one I listened to just kind of randomly and was like, oh, this is beautiful. This is perfect. And it's also like a haunting maxim where it doesn't need to be from the show. It's great that it is and how it's performed, but it's also like a beautiful lyric in and of itself, you know? And when I brought it in and was playing with it, like with the guitar, I originally was going to do this whole thing where I put it on cassette tape, and I did, and I kind of had it like looping through a loop pedal, and then realized that, you know, originally I was probably going to maybe edit out or mix out the strings and orchestral arrangements that are in the sample, and realized real quick, like, no, that's an accompaniment. That sounds, it's in the key of the guitar, you know, of the song itself. And it was just one of those beautiful unions where, we've got a little bit of an orchestral thing going on, not intentionally, but happily so. You know?
Yeah, it was a very serendipitous and synchronous occasion for that to work out so well. So I appreciate that you dug that one, and I appreciate that you know, just the work you did to weave it in there and make it not stand out too much. And it did sound like it was part of the track, you know what I mean? Already, it didn't sound like it was a sample layered over the top or anything like that. So it's cool.
Yeah, and of course the Alan Moore quote at the end, which, you know, we're both big fans of, and, you know, I've been widely known to sample some of his beautiful bits of language, especially in PRAGMAGICK. But that one just is a perfect encapsulation of, I think, not only the song, but, you know, from my escapades into magic and using kind of the vector of a ghost or a specter within hauntomancy and consciousness and temporal time and all of that, and having you know, find that already and had it kind of like ready and rearing to go somewhere was also another really beautiful communion, you know. And then it leads, you know, right when it ends, it leads right into Cali. And there's something special about these two songs together, because not only were the first two that we created, but they also, I think, beautifully illustrate the spectrum of, you know, dynamics, really, or like heavy charge versus like, you know, haunting saunter kind of a thing. And you know, you were always a torchbearer for keeping a serpentine, you know, desert fuzz thing, which I was very thankful for. And we should talk about influences too, whether they were influences that we were aware of or not. But that, I think those two songs are like the great, you know, dynamic of that serpentine desert, you know, fuzz.
Yeah. When you asked, like, when you kind of were throwing out, I don't want to say genre, but when you were throwing out adjectives to what the project would kind of direction it would go in, you had said, you know, a desert serpentine doom project. And I was like, oh, you're speaking my language, man. You know?
Yeah.
Saying, you know, and the other thing I was going to say is that sample of Alan, I've had that for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's been waiting to be used. I've used it a couple times live, but I don't think it would have had the same impact with the crowd at the local bars as it would the group of people that probably pay attention to you and Prag and, you know, whatever we're working on. So maybe it'll hit a little more closer to home. I've always loved that quote, and it's always been kind of a torch for me to remember that, you know, like that's a great that's a great, what's what I'm looking for, bulwark against, you know, materialism and nihilistic thought is to remember that consciousness is a ghost and a spook and a phantom, and it doesn't fit into the worldview of materialism. You know, and that was just, I always love that about Alan's quote. And I think those two songs specifically, yeah, they did set the tone. They set the tone, and they definitely are the two. I wouldn't say they're the complete spectrum because we do go in different directions, but I would say they definitely do solidify where it solidified for me, and I think for you too, where this was going to head and what was going to be, you know, one of your favorite words, like the thoroughfare of where this was headed. So
absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, one of the other aspects I wanted to touch on was, you know, you mentioned, and this was off the cuff, like keeping in mind your drumming oeuvre, like, and the power that you bring with it, and an element, you know, working with hauntomancy and like really kind of, I would maybe adapting, but also communing with like kind of lost parts of the self and like childhood whims and wonders, you know, like my bread and butter in the desert was the Melvins and Unwound and Fugazi and like very angular, hard, you know, Caius, like very desert born or angular Cascadian, you know, rip roaring kind of music. And it's something I've always had in me that I've wanted out, but just hadn't quite found the vehicle of which to like co-pilot it with. You know, there might be elements here and there with past bands, but it was never able to be exercised until now. And that, to me, that was a big like bridge and a hauntomantic way of like communing with the specter of the self, that like, hey, you remember you've always wanted to do this band, and somehow along, you know, this long and toiled history of life that you've lived so far, it just, you forgot about it, or it just hadn't been able to materialize in any way. And then here you are, and it was like, it just made perfect sense. And so it got to exercise, you know, a part of me that long wished would be able to just fuzz the fuck out, you know? Like,
yeah, man. You, yeah, I have nothing else to say. I agree.
Yeah. Well, and I think you share that in one degree, and I wrote a little bit about this in the draft of the HyperSigil thing that I posted on Patreon, especially specifically about DIMtZUM, and how I'm reticent to ever term the magic you put into this as hauntomantic or whatever. But one element you did say that I think sings to that is that you had these rhythms, or like the cachet of them in whatever mutation or form, like in your tool belt forever. And you finally found a vehicle to like exercise these, or like let these things go and live, you know, in some other ethereal space, so that you could, you know, construct a new era of self, you know? Yeah. And like, I think that's the other like confluence, is that we both got to, you know, commune with aspects of ourselves and give it the proper vehicle or urn, you know, to house its ashes if we're burning them down or building them up, or, you know, it's just like we gave it a talismanic life, you know, both of these.
Yeah. You know, speaking of Haunter specifically, the rhythm in that song, at least the one that it starts with, that it shuffles back and forth through, because there's two. I wrote when my drums were in the basement of one of my students, Dan, when I was in between living spaces, and I'd have to drive 40 minutes out to Woodstock, Illinois, where he lives, to play drums, because I couldn't have him at my dad's house where I was staying temporarily until I got this place. Yeah. And I wrote that rhythm down there by myself in this open field with a horse ranch in the back and this beautiful pine log cabin house in the basement. And then, I don't know if you noticed this, I was going to tell you, but if you go back to my Instagram and you look at the Eclipse Waltz video I did right after the last eclipse, that's this rhythm. That's
hilarious. Yeah.
So I've been trying to let it come out in different ways, and I've decided to retire some of these rhythms I've had forever that I would go to when jamming, or that I would try to find a way to fix them into a project one way or another, I finally was like, these are my favorite ones, and I'm going to put them into this because it deserves, you know, the best or the most creative that I can offer. And I also want to get better at drums. So now I have to expand my creative mind, and I have to expand my ability to play, because it's not that these were so technical that they were the best I could do. It's that they were a blend of creativity and technicality that pleased me. And now I have to up that. So
absolutely. Yeah. But I love that, that other shared, Eclipse idea, because, you know, that they have like really formed, the basis of a lot of the hauntomancy stuff and like my own personal praxis. So it's beautiful that that is a tether as well. That's really cool. I didn't know that, and I've definitely made a note to make mention of that, you know, moving forward, because that's really cool.
Go watch the video. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other cool thing, is that because of your large library of, you know, footage of you playing really rad, amazing rhythms, a lot of people can probably find the genesis of a lot of these songs, like on your Instagram, Transplutonic Instagram. So that's really cool too, is that, you know, as a documentarian, you know, adjacent creator myself, I think that's really cool. You can witness the tethers of these things pretty early on.
Yeah, there's at least 2 of them, if not more. You know what I mean? There's definitely a few of them up there that you can see where the seed idea is. And yeah, it's really what I bring, man. I really just bring this. I try to get as shamanic as I can with it without trying to sound pretentious or anything like that. Like, I really do try to get into that altered state when I write and or perform, because especially in this room for this project specifically, is like, I don't want to just play drums and call it magic. For me, that's
right.
Anybody can play drums and it's not just magic. You know what I mean? Like, and I know, you know, I do agree with you that creating art is a magical act, but I also think that intention is really important as well.
Absolutely.
So,
whenever I say that, it's to kind of lesser the, you know, maybe the mysterium stigma of magic to, you know, uber scientific or pragmatist type people.
Sure.
But what I truly mean, and with my thing, and actually, I, you know, was writing a lot about this today, about what constitutes a hypersigil, why this is a hypersigil from me and this isn't, why, you know, this is different, or like, and it's all just intention heavy. It's the minutia is all intention heavy. Everything is a ritualized art, an artifact of the creator at this moment in time, you know, projecting a prospector of what could be or what maybe is, you know. And so, like, I'm very resolute as well into being discernible about why this is magical, and not just saying, you know, in the flighty kind of flippant way, like, us creating together was magic. You know what I mean? That's not what I mean, even though there is truth to that. I mean very much to discern that there are some heavy magics within this shit, you know?
Yeah, there were synchronicities that happened throughout. And I think that once you start getting into the flickering, glimmering of synchronicity, you're starting to get back into that world of enchantment. And the logical mind, the analytical material mind will always try to rationalize it away. But if you acknowledge feeling, and if you acknowledge that it's kind of impossible for it to be just chance, you know, that us meeting each other, us getting along, us having these different tethers in different ways to each other, and liking the same things and wanting to play the same kind of project and all that stuff, it isn't necessarily magical, but it's synchronous and it's serendipitous, and it's definitely enchanting. You know, there's something outside of just roll the dice numerical chance that I believe that we're jamming. You know what I mean? That's and I use jamming as a loose term, but you know, I don't believe in that stuff anymore. I don't believe that it's all chaos theory and it's all just, you know, rolling dice and you're just a clock counting down. Like, what a sad way, in my opinion, to look at life. Like, you don't have any agency and you're just going to end up wherever you were going to end up in the first place. Like, I don't buy into that. And even if it is true and I'm just too stupid of a monkey to understand that, I will never capitulate to that, because it kills the spirit and I don't want my spirit to be killed. So
absolutely.
In saying what I mean is that this whole thing has been enchanting for me.
Mhm.
And like I said, I don't just want to hit drums and call it magic. I want to actually sit behind the kit, have an intention, get into that meditative space, just like I do when I perform my rituals in my actual temple, just like I do when I perform a group ritual, just like all these things I've been doing for years. And I am nowhere near adepthood or adeptship, whatever you want to call it, but just the intention behind it is 100% as important. You can stand in a room and recite the LBRP, but it doesn't really fucking matter if you don't get in your mind into the zone and actually banish the energies and actually have an effect on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always been so important to me to document the minutia and the aspects of this, because yeah, it's real easy to hide behind the mysterium of just calling an album a hypersigil and then allowing that to just have its own egregore or its own, like, people to put their own meaning or what could this mean. But to me, it's always been really important to be like, why is this a hypersigil? Like, what constitutes this as such? And like how exciting it is in that, like, Rainer Maria Rilke, like, Letters to a Young Poet way of like showing how one does one, how one creates one. I think that's like the most opportune lesson to be taught, is just by doing it, right? And then like showing, even though it might be personal and they're not like, scientific experiments in the same way that you can replicate them and have the same results or anything, it's more of an inspo punching way of like, this is how I got into the rhythms to create this thing. This is why it bled through every aspect of my life. This is why it's a document of every aspect of my life, from my fingers to my toes, my thoughts and my nose, that sort of shit. So like, it's always been really important to me to showcase that minutia. And I think that's exactly why I was excited for you and I to talk about this shit, because maybe on the surface it might seem a bit, I don't know, frivolous, or like maybe explaining too much, not letting the art speak for itself. It's like, no, there's an imaginarium where the art does speak for itself, and we speak through the art. But at the same time, like, it's incredible to like reflect and remark on how these things, are consorted, and like the elements that create such a beast,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like just the fact that I discovered PRAGMAGICK and you found your work, and then was able to make a connection with you, and then that's what I'm talking about. Like, to me, that's the lore, that's the magic. Like, that's what I want to know. How my favorite artists, like, what's the creepy shit that happened to them that may, what's the synchronicities that happened to them that like that shows you the tethers of how they met the people in their life, and then those people affected them, and that's how this art was created. Like, that's super interesting to me. It's not that we're crazily interesting people, although I mean, yeah, that you're definitely more interesting than me because I'm just like a dude. But like you're definitely you're making creative stuff all the time, and I'm always amazed by your prolificness and keeping yourself busy all the time. And I aspire to be like that. But
it's a good way to put it. Keeping myself busy. Yeah, that's essentially what it is.
Maybe you're just interesting to me. But regardless, I love that, and I want people to hear this album to know that like we're not just like, hey, yeah, we're making magic, everything's a ritual, check it out. No. Like there's a deeper story here that's happening that we're both sometimes aware of and sometimes not aware of, and we're becoming more aware of it as it happens, and that this is kind of a synchronous event that's playing out, and we're kind of documenting that this is a synchronous enchanted event that's playing out, and it shows itself in the music. And is that a little too on the nose, maybe a little bit, because we're like telling you like, yeah, we're doing this thing? It's like maybe a little bit, but it's also the beginning of this project, you know what I mean? And it's we're also super excited about it. So when you're super excited about something, you're going to be very into it.
And like, yeah, it's part and parcel of PRAGMAGICK, and what that element has always meant for me was to kind of showcase that this is how one does this, and you can too. And I think it's beautiful that there's a nexus point of, because of technology, we were allowed to do some things, but it's also like very intrinsic to, our experiences separately, and like how we approached it outside of just being able to do this transcontinentally or whatever, and I hope that like more people do instead of pontificate, or like, I like that too. I love that too. But, yeah, I want to live in a world where there's more art being created, from the ground up, and treated with reverence and excitement, and relishing in the absurdity of how things come together. Yeah, rather than not living in that world, right? So, but
Well,
I think a good example of that coming together and like those kind of synchronicities would be how DIMtZUM came to be, which is basically like the interlude of the record, which really surrounds your tongue drum melody that you played and what came from that, and how we took that and went completely not against, very parallel, but we deconstructed what we were doing and found another way to it.
Now it's recording.
Pleasurable experiences. In each moment, you could have done something else. But you, real. But dear, the real. Am I real? Are you telling the truth? Real illusions. Are you telling the truth in such illusions, in such plentitude? The only thing that seems to shock is a thing that's pretentious or kitsch. Extremes. Nobody will believe you. Old masters. Yes, of course, I remember her. But you do not seem. We have discovered a new world. And a new world is ending. Now we are recording. Space. Endless space.
The kind of centerpiece or the palette cleanser of side A and side B, if you will, of the record is this phenomenal audio sigil, like for all intents and purposes, between more than just us magicians, but also featuring Vanessa Sinclair, Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and some of Carl Abrahamson, two brilliant and incredibly storied mages in their own rights, who she provided, recordings of her reading never before released, some of her cut-ups. What you hear is her basically kind of reading the same thing, but two different takes that I compiled into kind of a spectrum and had them, dance with each other and kind of cut up a bit towards the end. But yeah, and that to me is pretty amazing that, not only that they would grace us with, some of their original work, but that came together kind of as a lark, because Dr. Sinclair had heard the Revel Rosz song sigil, Many Names, that I had just put out, and she was like, "Hey, we should do something together. I'm going to send you some recordings." And I was like, "That's great." And then I don't think I ever got the email, or it got lost in like spam or something, and I didn't think much to it. And it wasn't until, we were kind of finalizing the record and knew we needed some tether to it that I remembered that, holy shit, Dr. Vanessa Sinclair was going to send me some stuff. I have just the thing. And so I sent her a rough, mix of your tongue drum and me playing the spirit box, from the cassette tape of our session. And she's like, oh yeah, this is going to be great. And then I just kind of had carte blanche to take what she sent me and created this thing. So talk about a magical artifact. Like, this song in and of itself is a heavy charge for sure.
Yeah, it is. And it's a little, what was the word I used? It was a little surreal for me too, because I don't know if you remember this, but the way I found you and found Prag was looking up Carl Abrahamson interviews. And that's pretty funny to me that within, not even a year later, or, maybe a year later, playing on an album, or whatever, I'm playing on a release that features both of their voices and their words on there. I know Big Carl being like, now it's recording, and then we just go into it. It's really awesome, and all. And that was great. Vanessa's just every little piece of that was great. Like, I love how you doubled up and dual tracked some of the vocals, so they were like, well,
those are two different takes. Yeah, of her. Yeah. Those are like two different atmospheres where she's reading the same thing, and I think she sent me these as like takes. So like Carl's voice in there, it wasn't necessarily meant to be included. They both say this is recording as kind of a marker, and I was like, no, I'm using that. That's perfect. That's a beautiful like entryway into this, and like what she says, lyrically. Whether they're lyrics or not, or cut ups, or her writing, I think perfectly encapsulates that like atmosphere of this dim desert between us that we were, transmitting and creating, and that sort of lore. And honestly, I had either forgotten or just didn't remember that Carl was a genesis of us, pun intended, but of meeting, of you finding me. And another beautiful synchronicity that he would and they would appear on this thing. That's crazy. I didn't connect the dots when, no, I consorted them.
That's why I said it was surreal for me, because I remember reading Source Magic, and I remember reading A Culture, and I have a bunch of the Fenris Wolf books. And I was last spring or summer, I was just listening to all the interviews I could get by him, just on everything, just listening to all the Source Magic, because he had just put that book out. And then I was looking for interviews, and I found your channel, and that's just how it all started, man. So I think that's why I said it was surreal, because, and to see him repost it on Instagram was just like, it's just cool. It's just like, not even that like he's a celebrity or anything. It's just really cool to see like a person whose work I was influenced by and reading, and lives in Sweden or wherever they live. And it's like to somehow then get in touch with you, and then somehow you were on good terms with them, and then they wanted to collect. It's insane. Like, if that's not synchronicity, man, I don't know what to tell you it is,
Yeah, no, that's that all worked out beautifully. And they too are some of the few modern cultural people that I just like relish and adore and love everything that they do and stand for and create and hum with. And after years of, doing the podcast and meeting folks, like they are two that, they were just on the Hauntquinox last year, the We the Hallowed thing. Like they're two that I still fervently keep in contact with and, keep up to date with their own creations. I adore their entire like drive and like fervent nature when it comes to creativity and magic and writing and music and all sorts of they're transmedium creators. So Yeah, that's funny. So in a way too, it was there was a part of me that was giving some like reverence, to them, and I just think it's funny that on a whim, I just I recalled that like it wasn't too long ago, like literally maybe within the month, that she mentioned she was going to send me things for a potential musical collab, and thank the gods that they dug it, like. And they're the type of people who would get it for sure. Full stop, so.
Right. That's another interesting and beautiful connection there that I'm glad we made, and the music had an effect on them. I like to think that they, genuinely enjoyed it or genuinely found some value in it, because that's great.
Yeah, man. I think what I loved about this one too, not only did it kind of split this 13 minutes and 33 second, huge combustible, like heavy magical thing, it also like introduces the second half. And I think in a way, the second half of the piece is more descriptive of what we are, like the mode we are currently working within, in a way, like between falter and low. It seems like that, like the album's laid out in sort of a progression, of like what we started from, even though it's a little jumbled in the first half, but those were early ones into later. And by later, I mean, the same month, it's like not much, but it shows like the progression of like what we were experimenting with and kind of going into and doing. So I think that's really cool that they kind of set the tone for that,
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I did want to just to jump into Falter, which I think is, it's just grew to be, I don't know, it grew to be my favorite. And it's also where I started really experimenting, because this next track, and we'll talk a little bit about it more, but I customized a guitar for it, basically. Which wasn't working. It was defunct, and I got off my ass and decided to create a talisman for this song, an instrumental one, and that became the basis for it. And this one, I think, continues to grow as a personal favorite of mine. But it's a grower for sure. Forgive the term.
I've said it before.
Space. Endless space.
Still no life cosmic influence previously unknown is coming forth beyond the normal tree of life.
All right, yeah, and we should talk about the Paul Weston sample too at the end, because that's another magnanimous, like magically. We just inserted, long story, great folks into things and kind of continued a relationship with them,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we could touch on the Paul thing. I love his work in general. You know what I mean? I have Aleister Crowley and the Aeon of Horus, which is a hard book to find. It's expensive. He's going to reprint it apparently, but listen to all his interviews, and just he's one of those people who really got me even more into Kenneth Grant, which I know we're both into, even more than I was. And he's got a reverence for that stuff, and he's very into synchromysticism as well, and I love that. So having him, I was listening to an interview, I can't remember which one, and that little snippet at the end popped out to me as something we might be able to use, because it did have to do with the new Isis Lodge, and like I talked about before, Kenneth Grant, who's a personal magical hero of mine, and just how it was representative of this new thing being brought forward from somewhere that isn't standard, isn't normal, and I feel like we're kind of doing that, so we're trying to.
Yeah, no, it was beautiful, and obviously our Kenneth Grant shows not only in like the Karanzan kind of serpentine aspects of the project in and of itself, but your Mauve room, it being called the Mauve Sessions, which is also a general play on Kenneth Grant, but also giving credence to your element with the dim, part of the DIMtZUM element. And I think that was like a good, whole together. So yeah, that was another piece that fit the puzzle. I did want to talk about, just to nerd out a little bit, but Mary had gotten me this guitar as a project guitar, I think, for my birthday. I've always wanted like a Mustang, but I always had the intention of putting a Bigsby bridge on it. And, it's just a cheap guitar that I had. Call it the Resonar guitar. It's, really cheap guitar that I, put literally blood is on it from cutting myself, installing this fucking Bigsby bridge on it, which is absurd. And that is the guitar you hear on Falter. And it was in pieces, because I was fucking myself up installing this, and it was, oh yeah, I'm using stuff to like lift the bridge a bit, but it was in pieces. It was tattered, and this song gave me the impetus to finish this project and be like, no, in my mind, I have, something for this song. And it all started from this. So like this talisman literally was kind of created through DIMtZUM. And outside of this, being created, like most of the guitar you hear is, of course, the good old ectogasm, where I'm allowed to really fuzz it out. And that's the baritone electric that is prominent in pretty much all of my stuff, but never heard like this really before, So between these two very intentional and kind of intrinsic talismanic instruments, that's where a lot of the guitar comes from.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Oh, as I break one, watch. But
oh, shit.
But yeah, it's just interesting to me that in a magical way, blood was shed. There was construction in a somatic way of creating tools and talismans to create the music, So that's just it's a personally a really cool element that I just wanted to share about it.
Yeah, I never, I knew that, but I guess I never knew how that you assembled it. I thought it was just an old guitar that you kind of put the Bigsby on, and now I realize that's awesome. That's beautiful that you created that specifically for the project and for that song. And, I specifically created that beat that you hear throughout that song for it too. I mean, all of them, but like I specifically was playing around with this idea of 5, like accenting the first 3 notes of a pattern of 5. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the kick pattern. That's the pattern underneath of that beat, and you hear that over the top. So it's very much polyrhythmic in an odd time signature, which I thought was, you could follow it, so it wasn't like you wouldn't get lost, but at the same time it was hypnotizing and mesmerizing a little bit, because it wasn't as predictable as some other beats might be, which I like.
What I loved about it is it allowed me to like create a sinew where I could either follow that to the T or like imprint, another kind of, even a 4/4 time signature that can weave into it. So like it opened a room, because it was, it was subliminal in its way of a time signature, which is really cool. And I love that. And I hope the more we create, the more we experiment too with just the maths of it. I know there was experimentation of that, but that would be a really cool element to really share in,
I love how you matched my bell tone on the little whatever chorus or whatever that is, the actual bell hits on the ride, because there's a certain note hits and your guitar matches that note, and I feel like them singing together and that bell being so pronounced in the song, it being almost like an added layer of melody, really made it cohesive. That's one of those reasons where at first that song, it was going to be another one of those things where I was like, I don't know, and then I really kind of was like, let me listen to this again, because I feel like there's something here. And I kept listening to it. And like we said, it's a grower. Like every time I listen to it, it gets more and more, I get more and more enveloped in it. And I find it to be more and more interesting and enjoyable every listen. So,
yeah, funnily enough, on the surface, I think it's the most straightforward song. But if you really start to unpack it, there's nothing really straightforward about it. Even like the vocals, like I was playing with like I remember like tuning into this idea of like a true chaotic, like drunk magic, and like wearing, addiction as like a character. And so there's a part in the song where he, like the narrator switches into like a, and that's like almost like he's giving from the cuff, like talking about, mental disfluencies, and, conversations hard, company's tough, and just like doesn't give a fuck about it in a way. And that was all like kind of off the cuff, but I immediately knew that I was kind of messing with like a narrative structure and like character, and how to, expel that vocally. And it was just fun. And it was a weird idea, and it was just something, again, like channeled, that I kept to it when I kind of refined it. So
yeah. I think the title of that song too really helps.
Yes. And
that's another thing too I like to focus on, is like I've always been a person who likes to name songs before I write them, because the title gives you a direction and allows you to kind of paint a picture as you go with a little bit of a scaffolding. It's not a tight constriction, but it's like a direction for you to go. So I find that scaffolding really helps me create, because otherwise it's just kind of, where do I start? Is this good? I don't know how to measure this against anything in terms of, is it actually succeeding in being, useful? So that really helps.
Yeah, I think I like to think of it, because I'm a big title person myself, but I think of it in the context of like a filing cabinet of ideas. Like I just have a barrage of ideas, and the way I can quickly, encapsulate those ideas, or have a quick messenger service of them, is file them under certain titles, and like that title in it of itself encapsulates like the whole thought train of like what I meant by going down, this avenue. So yeah, it's a magical aspect of memory and, ideas, and giving like names to the egregore of like ideas, right? Before they're fleshed out. I mean, granted, it's, song by song. Some things like, maybe start out that way, and then you just kind of allow the, genealogy of the muse to bend it ever which way. But yeah, a lot of times I will start by filing an idea or like a inspiration as a title. So that's what was fun about this exercise, with you kind of bringing the genealogy of titles into it, and then me allowing to kind of like, bend them or kind of mutate them, but have that genealogy still there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I know we've got we started with Bellows. For those that are watching this, that's the intro to the album is the intro to this episode, and in a beautiful kind of circular way, it's also the reprise of the end of Alas and Lo, which to me, perfectly exemplifies that the ritual's never done. Time is a flat circle. No, I'm just kidding, but
Totally. No, it's beautiful. It's I think when you tie a concept together and begin it and end it with an echo back and forth like that, it does make it cohesive in that way. It makes it a solid, it's a singular expression that has chapters. And I think that is, it lends itself to being absorbed and processed by the mind and the soul a little bit more easily than having to, swim your way through and try to aggregate all these things. You kind of understand, like, okay, this whole thing takes place within these bookends. And I like that. Yeah,
and that's like elemental to what I mean by calling something a sigil, whether it be, an album or video art or whatever. It's like the intrinsic processes and tethering them all together, like all the minutia as well, and getting into the weeds. Like, we thought long and hard about song structure and how Bellows was, definitely the circle drawing kind of liminal right into the thing, and how DIMtZUM, we needed something as, the kind of powers kind of mutate and focus, and then, just kind of the raucous nature of a ritual in and of itself, but at the same time calling back, closing the circle is opening the circle at the same time. It's that, like, evocation, like, what's the difference, kind of a thing, like, made whole. Yeah.
It is almost like a ritual cycle in itself. And I think that is, that actually wasn't intentional, but it was definitely purposeful at the end when we were like, okay, maybe we should reprise. We were calling it Glissades for a while, Ghost Glissades, which was a cool title, but we ended up going with, Bellows and Alas and Lo, because Alas was a separate song in itself, and then to add that reprise at the end, I think tied it together in or tethered it together in a very beautiful fashion that it did feel to me like the opening and closing of a rite. So I appreciate that on a lot.
Yeah, and there was a part of me that always knew that it would be the elements or like the schematics of a ritual in an artistic way, but they really fell into place quite naturally, like just through the product of us, of like you not wanting something different in how you perform Bellows, and I was like, well, let's keep Bellows, but give me how you would update that, and we'll turn that into something else, So it was all very like natural. It was very much like, oh shit, yeah, we should make this a reprise, and have it revolve. It was never like pretentious in the sense that like, and here's a liminal right, and here's like that was all I think understood, like automatically understood that's kind of how this was unfolding,
Yeah, and you never added that tambourine, did you?
Nope, didn't. Got away.
Yeah. I realized that a few days ago. I'm like, damn it, you got me.
No, I know. I remembered it was on my mind, but it was something that I was like, oh, I guess it just didn't like that element didn't charge heavy enough for both of us to care for that idea to be expelled. But it's something that I always kind of intended to do. It's just, got lost in the tundra. And that is like the beautiful, like fallibility of creating something like this quickly and honestly. It's like, to kind of ingress with regret and like commune with that. Like, I wish I would have mixed the vocals a little bit lower on bellows, but like, that's the beauty. This isn't the end of that song. This isn't the ultimate version of anything other than an encapsulation of time or like the genesis of a shared idea. Like we are free.
I do
the fuck we want moving forward, and to change things and reprise things and add things. And maybe in a way, like the reprise of bellows at the end of Alas and Lo is that opener of us saying, hey, we can, these will come back if we want them to be coming back, Maybe. Yeah.
I dig that a lot. And hopefully, like you said, this will not only haunt on for both of us. I know it will, but I also like the fact that hopefully some more artists who are metaphysically minded click in on it and go, wow, okay, this inspires me in this way, or wow, maybe I should start that project with that person I've been talking to, who lives wherever, or just, like your favorite, inspo punch, like to really, really inspire somebody to do something that they may be thinking about or that they've been wanting to do. Because that's kind of how it was for you. You were wanting to do a project like this for a long time, and you kind of went down other avenues and kind of put it on the shelf and almost forgot the shelf existed for a while. And then, just the synchronicity of me bumping into you and stuff like that. So hopefully others use this as I don't know if talisman is the right word, but they use it as some sort of productive
instigator or something.
Yeah, right. A productive force in their life, because that's the whole point of it, is to get you in that. I think it puts me in a magical mind state when I listen to it, and I think that should be the goal. You know what I mean? It should take you out of mundanity, or whatever the word is, mundaneness of life, and put you to that magic, that literally magical thinking space, to where everything has that little glimmer again, and then you can start like, oh yeah, I want to do this thing, so.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah.
It makes perfect sense. And I think just to add on to that, just because you're connected with somebody, across the country or wherever in the world, like doesn't, and like you want to collaborate, doesn't mean it should the computer should end all be all. It doesn't mean that, you can't infuse a collaboration with like heavy somatic intention and performance and share ability, communion with that person in two very disparate places. Like it doesn't mean that, these communions need to just exist online. They could live in your house, by you actually putting some somatic charge into works and things. And people should be excited about that, because it is exciting,
100%. And I think if you make the digital aspect, the plumbing and the tool, like I talked before, and it's not the basis of your creation, it's simply, it's like using the mail, you know what I mean? Like if it's something like that, then you still have a reverence for your space and your time and your creativity, and that becomes the focus. And then it's just the digital aspect of it is simply just the necessary
mechanism.
Yeah, it's a mechanism. And I think if you focus on that, then you're going to start tapping into these realms that you and I have slowly started to, just kind of open the door slightly on and get some of the cold air inside from the other world,
Yeah. And again, this is definitely a shot across the bow of, a reformation of We the Hallowed, and like the injection that, a community of artists like We the Hallowed needed, and working with Eric Millar, you and I, and kind of reformatting forgive the drama, but like the new aeon, right, of We the Hallowed. And what that means is like a publishing house and as a collaborative effort, but also a hub of, individual artists sharing and connecting, no matter where they are in the world, I think is like the perfect continuation or prospector of this sort of work. And it's become emblematic, almost talismanic of moving forward. Like, we are not confined to the boxes in front of us. Like, we're going to charge shit as hard and as somatic as possible, even if we need to rely on the boxes in front of us,
Mm-hmm. Right on.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm going to, we're going to close out with Alas and Lo. And yeah, man, I'm excited for what's to come. And I could talk about this shit all day. It's incredible. I learned a lot from this, and spooky wise, some spooky synchronicities, really cool ones. So yeah. Thanks, man. And I appreciate this project. It came out of fucking nowhere, and it's become a great inspo punch for sure.
Yes. I appreciate the project, and I appreciate you too as well, my friend. So let's haunt on, and let's make sure we keep this thing rolling, and we make a platform for all these other artists who may not even know we exist yet, but we will bump into down the road.
Amen to that, and a very mighty haunt on.
There are